nationwide.
In back segment tonight, crime, guns, and sanity. Today on Capitol Hill, more hearings about gun control. A lot of blather, nothing urgent. We'll have the inside story with Rosen and Cameron of what went on in just a few moments. But here's something really interesting. On the front page of the New York Times today, they actually ran an article that said despite Chicago's tough gun laws, the murder rate there continues to be out of control. Last year, more people were killed by Chicago gunfire than among coalition forces in Afghanistan. Can you believe it? 440 people, including as many as 57 children, gunned down in the streets. Now, the Factor has been reporting about why this is all happening, but apparently we overlooked one thing.
Now, there are contributing factors that are not under anybody's control and may seem odd, but it is factually true. One of them is actually the weather. There is a dramatic increase in gun violence when it is warmer, and we are having this climate change effect that is driving that.
So global warming, partially responsible for the murder rate in Chicago. Good to know. Joining us now from Washington, Kate Obenshain, a Republican strategist, and Kirsten Powers, a Democrat and Fox News analyst. So Powers, I thought it was a good sign. The New York Times actually going against their editorial policy and reporting on the gun madness in Chicago. And you say?
Yeah, I think it's great, though. You know, the editorial page and the news page are not connected. They're completely separate things.
Oh, I didn't know that. Perhaps I didn't know that because in the last 10 years, there's been absolutely no deviation. But thank you for telling me that.
No, that is not true. That's not true. There is no. They have a very, very strict wall between the two. They're not the same. They do. I'm sorry, but that's the truth.
Okay, yeah.
And but yes, it is great that they reported on it, and I think they got into one of the fundamental problems that's not discussed enough, which is yes, Chicago, the city has these gun laws, but the state doesn't have the strict gun laws, and the surrounding states don't have strict gun laws, which means that you can go right outside city limits and buy a gun.
State of Illinois has very, very strict laws, but you're correct. Your point is correct. That you can go outside of New York City, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and it's easier to buy a gun. But the problem is that's not going to change with any ban because there are already 300 million plus guns on the street.
Yes.
Okay, so not going to change. Now, Gabby Giffords, the former congresswoman from Arizona, was shot, and terrible. Everybody feels bad for her. She testified on the Hill today, and when, as I said, Cameron and Rose got some inside stuff on that. But that was a very emotional moment, Ms. Obenshain. And she's appealing for much tighter gun laws. And you say to her?
Right. Well, I say to her that it's a tragedy what happened to her, just as what happened in Newtown is, and that has to be acknowledged. But what is great about the New York Times article today is that they broke through sort of the swirl of emotion and actually pointed out the fact that these oppressive gun laws are not working, in part, not just because guns are available elsewhere, but because criminals do not buy guns from licensed gun owners. They're not just going across the border to buy guns. They buy guns from other criminals. They don't care what the they
don't care where they come from, right? As long as they get a discount on them.
But as long as they can buy them, that's all they care about. Actually, Kirsten, it is true. That's where the that's where the criminals buy the guns.
I'm fascinated by Powers' take this evening, telling me that there's a separation of church and state at the New York Times, which I find very amusing, and now telling me it's not true that criminals will buy guns from anywhere. Do you think that they have a certain? Do they have to have a little polo pony on the gun, or
criminals will buy guns anywhere, but they happen to buy a lot of guns from gun stores.
Yeah, so whatever's cheaper, whatever's closer.
Okay, but the point is, like, the idea that they're just only sold on the black market is not true. In this New York Times article, they talk about 1,300 of the guns that they confiscated in Chicago came from one store outside of the city limits of Illinois. So don't act like not having stricter gun laws outside the city wouldn't help.
Actually, Kirsten, actually what would help would be if we enforce the gun laws that were already on the books. If they are buying their guns from licensed gun dealers, they are lying on their criminal background checks, which we have seen that Joe Biden said, hey, we don't have time to check the criminal background checks. Well, you know what? That's why that's a law. These people would not be able to buy guns from licensed dealers.
Unless they committed fraud on the thing. Which brings me back to my point, which the New York Times did not address, and the pinheads on Capitol Hill won't address. You got to federalize all gun crimes. Then you have a uniformity in punishment. Then you send a message, hey, you buy a gun legally and you have a fraudulent background check, 10 years.
Right.
10 years. That's it.
That's on the books.
That's where you
They're
go.
just not doing it.
No, no, it's not on the books because every state has different laws and every state has different qualifications. If President Obama and the Democratic Party and the NRA, which says it wants to cut down on gun crime too, if all of these people were serious about it, they'd stop the nonsensical stuff that doesn't work, and they would say, we're federalizing gun crimes. We're going to have very strict across state lines what you can and can't take. And you get out of line, you violate the gun law, you're going to get a mandatory prison sentence. And believe me, that would cut it down way. But you didn't answer my question, Kate, and I'm very disappointed. Gabby Giffords, there
right.
she is. And how are we as Americans, if she wants stricter gun laws, shouldn't we rally to her cause?
We should rally to the cause of genuine reforms that are actually going to cut down on gun violence. Taking away the right of law-abiding citizens to be able to protect themselves is not going to help. In fact, as we see in Chicago, it actually hurts. What it does is makes us a nation of predators versus defenseless victims.
You would say you want the same thing that she wants, but you would debate her on how to get there. Is that correct?
Of course, we all want less gun violence. We just want reasonable reforms and enforce what we already have on the books.
Powers, would you like to just tell me one more time how the New York Times hard news pages differ from their editorial? Just
There's an editorial page, and they work in a separate area, and they write their editorials, and then there are reporters, and they do not collude with each other.
Do not collude.
That's a fact.
They don't need to.
You can't. Can you prove that they collude, Bill?
No, you're absolutely right, Powers. No.
But can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, go.
I completely agree with you on the federalizing. I'm kind of almost about to faint, actually, because I completely agree that
my
that's what we need to do.
solution works. Ladies, thanks very much. We appreciate